We may see periods of well below average air in January. The question for me though is, will we see above average snow? I'm going to break down my January outlook for you right now, so let's get right into it. It's December 21st, 2025. Let's get into my January outlook. The first thing I wanted to start off with here is our European weekly control run. Now, this is obviously a control run, not an ensemble. I just wanted to start with this because it is actually impressive how aggressive it is getting with the cold air and potential snowfall setup for the East in January. If you look at this, as we move into January, really the second, third, and even fourth week of January, we see a very positive PNA here. And we see a negative NAO setup with a jet stream that is diving into the east. You want a big nor'easter. This is an incredible setup for you guys. You guys should be loving the European control right now. But this is the European weekly control. I'm just showing you this because obviously the European's a good model. Now, it's tough for any model to see this far out, but this would be really, really incredible for the East here for January, for cold air and for snow. But now let's get a little more realistic here. Not that that couldn't happen, but let's take a look at our ensembles. And this right here is our 500 millibar height anomaly on the ensembles. Now watch as we go into January here. You don't see this major troughing out east. Now you do have your jet stream actually trying to dig into the east. You do see a negative NAO setting up, but you don't have a very positive PNA, meaning you don't have a ridge setting up out west that can really help dig these troughs in and pull some snow up the coast, up the east coast. The way the ensemble sees this, meaning most of the models averaged out together, is a lot of cold air really from coast to coast. But with this type of setup, I don't know that we see a lot of snow. This type of setup to me would look like a very dry, potentially end of the first week of January, all the way through potentially up into the fourth week of January. Very dry, very cold pattern. We could have kind of a cold zonal flow from coast to coast and maybe not that active of a subpolar jet, especially because I don't think we're pushing back into an ENSO neutral as quick as some may think, and we'll get into that in a second. There are similarities here between the European control and the European ensemble. The troughing, wanting to dig out east, wanting to kind of bend out towards the east. A negative NAO potentially trying to set up here. A pretty cold pattern for the States. Again, I'm not seeing this ridge in the ensembles though. So right off the bat, taking a look at the European control and the European ensemble, I would lean towards, hey, January could be well below average temperature-wise. Very wintry feeling, but maybe we stay on the drier side. Not that we couldn't have a couple big snowstorms in January, but are we going to have a very active, like I said, subpolar jet with a large PNA ridge out west to get a ton of snow into the Ohio Valley and east? Maybe not. This would actually be a much better setup for snow into the Rockies, into the west. Now, taking a look at the latest MJO forecast, this is also interesting. This would again suggest to me a cold January, pushing back into phase 7, phase 8. It's not getting super amplified though. If we could get this a little bit more amplified, I mean, this could be well below average air. This would actually even help us have some good chances to get snow down into the south. And there's a possibility that the MJO does amplify into phase 7, phase 8 in January here. This also supports some pretty cold air from coast to coast as well. Again, I think that might be in the form of a zonal flow where we just have our polar jet sinking, especially because of how weak our stratospheric polar vortex has been here through December. And speaking of the stratospheric polar vortex, you can see it doesn't want to sit up here near our average. It is sitting well below the average. And again, this right here, you do not have a tight circulation around the coldest air on the planet up there over the North Pole. And this air eventually, the coldest air on the planet, is going to sink down into the mid-latitudes. We always talk about it. A lot of times you see a 2 to 3 week delay. Sometimes people say 4. I think it's a 2 to 3 week delay. So middle of January, cold zonal flow for the United States. Could we be cold coast to coast and dry? Again, that is kind of what I'm seeing here looking forward. But it's interesting because the 12Z GFS and the 12Z Euro that came out today and the European weekly control see a potentially very, very aggressive winter pattern, or winter storm pattern, I should say, in the beginning of January. Meaning maybe, again, I've been saying the second, third week, maybe we have a very active beginning of January. And I do think that's possible. And then we cool down, dry out for a little bit through the second and third week of January, and then we flip back into that active winter pattern as we push into the fourth week of January and into early February. I'm just thinking out loud here as I'm making this video and as we're talking about kind of the January setup. So what does the Climate Prediction Center think for December? Here you go. And honestly, this is a lot more generous than I thought they'd be with cool air. Remember, January, especially as we get into the second half of it, coldest month of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. So all of this area here that doesn't have that orange or red shade or blue shade, this is the Climate Prediction Center saying, we think this is going to be an average January temperature-wise. Well, guess what? An average January temperature-wise is cold and can give you snow in low elevations and kind of in these southern regions as well, if you get the right storm systems obviously moving through at the right time. And it's not so bad for the southeast either. I mean, this is only slightly above average here in January, as well as down here in the southwest. Now, again, southern New Mexico, southern Texas, southern portions of Louisiana, South Florida. That's when it starts to look pretty warm for January, but this is not too bad, and you can see where the coldest air really wants to stay up here to the north. This is a very La Nina look, so not surprised to see that from NOAA as well. Getting into our precipitation. Remember, according to the Climate Prediction Center, and I actually think it might be even cooler, but the Climate Prediction Center thinks this area is going to be average for the month of January. That's cold in January with above average moisture here. Could the Ohio Valley Midwest see a lot of snow in January? The Climate Prediction Center likes it, as well as up here in the Northwest. I actually think it's going to be colder than the Climate Prediction Center thinks for the month of January. Not by a ton, but I do think we're going to see that period of kind of zonal flow where the jet really sinks and we get just maybe a 10 to 14 day stretch of just well below average air across the country. There could be periods though through January where we warm up and obviously it offsets the average for the month, so we'll have to see. My question is though, where's all this moisture coming from if we don't have a strong subtropical jet, which I think it's going to be tough for us to get that. A lot of this moisture may be expected early January and near the end, not towards the middle of January. Now, a lot of this moisture up here in the Northwest, we're going to move right into January and we're still going to have a ton of storm systems slamming into that coast. So I do think a lot of this is up front. And now we need to talk about Europe. And why are we talking about Europe? Don't worry, I'm not doing a forecast or outlook for Europe. And for anyone who watches my channel from Europe, I have nothing against Europe. Obviously, I'm just trying to cover the outlook for January in the States. But Europe's weather does have an effect on the States. A lot of times you start seeing a major cool down in Europe. You'll see that cool down in the States 5 to 10 days later. Same with when you get a major warm up in Europe. We both have a very large body of water out to our west. We react to troughing and ridging patterns somewhat similarly, and it takes about 5 to 10 days for these kind of waves to propagate around the Arctic in the northern hemisphere. So if you see a major cool down in Europe, you can usually expect that we may be seeing a cool down coming in the States. Now I want you to watch what happens here as we get into around Christmas. It starts getting cold in Europe, very cold. Scandinavia, not so much. The rest of Europe, pretty cold. We move forward through the end of December, we're still cold. They get maybe a little warm up, and then again, cold. This right here makes the first couple of weeks of January, to me, look pretty cold in the States. Maybe for everyone. It could favor the east or west. It depends if we get a positive PNA, negative NAO, depends what type of ridging we have set up, negative EPO. We'll see. But this is another sign here. And we spoke about how weak our stratospheric polar vortex winds have been. This in combination with that, again, it's screaming that we're going to have a stretch of below average air here, potentially in early January. I think definitely as we get into the second and third week of January. Now let's talk about one of my favorite things here, and that is teleconnections, because you don't have a map to look at, but the teleconnections can really tell you a story here. Let's take a look at our Arctic oscillation. Well, this thing wants to trend negative in January. What's a negative AO? That is a weak polar vortex, a polar vortex that wants to dive south. That's a lot of cold air that wants to get into the mid latitudes. This right here, good sign if you want below average air in January. If you don't, I'm sorry. The GFS sees the trend too. Take a look at that. You can see the mean going negative. Overall, this is trending negative, neutral to negative. We don't see a very positive AO here. Our NAO, you want this to be negative if you're in the Ohio Valley, really the plains out towards the East Coast, because this gives you a setup here for some good winter storms and some well below average air. We're seeing this trend negative in January. You go over to the GFS, guess what? Same thing, negative in January. Pretty positive EPO here in the beginning of January, and I think this is what I'm talking about when I say we could get a big winter storm or a few big winter storms here in early January before getting cold and drying out. Now, my biggest issue with are we going to see above average snowfall in January is we see a negative NAO that wants to hold for a little bit. We also have a negative PNA, and we could have a nice positive jump right there, but overall, negative PNA trend. Let's go to the GFS. It sees it too. This doesn't allow for these sharp troughs to dig down and pull that Gulf moisture off and head up to the east. A lot of times this is bringing cold air and storm systems directly into the west and not downstream. And we have a negative WPO, so we have that blocking up in Canada, or we're projected to have that blocking up in Canada to allow this cold air to sink downstream. But a negative PNA, a negative NAO, again, this can put us in a zonal flow. This could be the reason maybe we don't have the supply of moisture we need, but we're cold. And I remember, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, but when I was in Philly and we had one of the coldest Januaries we had in a while, and we saw, I don't know, a couple inches of snow. We basically had nothing. And that's frustrating. When it's very cold, you at least want some snow, right? If you're going to have well below average temperatures for 2 to 3 weeks straight, you could at least be given a little bit of snow. So this is the one thing making me a little bit nervous. But I'm going to be watching these models over the next few days for this PNA specifically. Okay? Arctic oscillation, EPO, WPO, NAO, whatever. I'm watching the PNA, because if we start to see a positive PNA trend with all of this below average air that we're expecting to sink into the States in January, and with that collapsing polar jet, and with us potentially staying in a La Nina a little bit longer than we thought, there's an opportunity here for big snow through the Ohio Valley and up the East Coast. But we need this PNA. We don't get it, it's going to be dry. Again, though, as I said earlier, this would be an opportunity for some good snow in the Rockies and out west. So if you're out west, you like the trend right now, at least on the ensembles, not on the control runs that we're seeing, but on the ensembles. You like this trend for January for a lot of snow. So what am I talking about when I say I think we may stay in a La Nina a little bit longer? Well, a lot of models were projecting that our Nino 3.4 index was going to start climbing. Well, it's not really climbing. It's just moving right along here. We're still in that region. We have water temperatures more than 1 degree Celsius below average. So we're kind of in a moderate La Nina territory, although you can see we've come back up into that weak La Nina. So we're not going to trigger into a moderate La Nina, but this gives us more opportunities as we move through January, February, and March for some more stratospheric polar vortex issues, some more breakdowns of that stratospheric polar vortex. They're more likely to happen in a La Nina than in a neutral or El Nino. And when we have those stratospheric polar vortex breakdowns, you get weird opportunities for very, very far southern snow. So you're kind of seeing the opportunity right now for a lot of things to happen. In my opinion, I think the beginning of January could be pretty active. We'll maybe say the first 10 days. I think we could have the opportunities for some big snowstorms. Then I think we get a nice cool down, a nice stretch of cold air. We could end up sitting in a zonal flow for a little bit where our polar jet collapses, pulls some storms in over the west. You start to get some big snowfall out west, a lot of cold air out east, maybe some clippers, but no major snowstorms. And then we start to reactivate at the end of January. And you start to see some potential big snowstorms through the plains back out east. Now, again, this is what I'm seeing right now. I'm going to watch specifically what's happening with our Pacific North American oscillation, because if you start to see a ridge building up in these ensembles and in these models, that's going to really drastically change what I think is going to happen mid-January. Because if you start to see that ridge build, we could be set up for major snowstorms out east. You don't see that ridge set up, you could have a nice flow, like I said, of snow and moisture out west and some extended colder air. So that one thing, PNA, that could really change my outlook. But I've told you what I think, and I'm going to be watching it. And as these videos move on, especially as we get up to New Year's Eve, if I see some signals of a negative PNA staying or a positive PNA growing, I'm going to let you guys know. I appreciate you guys watching this video. If you like this type of content, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I am constantly uploading videos like this, forecasts, outlooks. I love doing this. I try to get on and live stream every day. I've had some issues with my technology lately, but I will get back into my streaming 7 days a week, typically in the morning. And if you want to join an awesome weather Discord, the link to my Discord is right down in the description of all of my YouTube videos and YouTube lives. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video or the next live stream.